Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, welcome to Talking Joe. Today we're doing something slightly different to our normal type of deep dive episodes, talking about specific issue. Today we will be talking about the future comic plans and what we would like to see from whatever that new publisher has got up their sleeves. So I will be joined by some special guests to have a little bit of discussion about what we think and hope for the future. And of course, I won't be doing it alone. I will be joined, as always, by my co-host. It's Tim.
I really want to talk Joe with you. It's a real American Tim. American Tim.
Hello, Mark, and hello, listeners and viewers. We thought we would do something lighter because some of our recent episodes have involved a lot of lining up of comics guest or reading and thinking and researching. And if we're just going live and chatting with some guests who are important but not very important, they're RIPs, they're regularly important persons, we could have an episode and have a lighter time of it. Let's introduce those other people.
So today we are joined by two people joining us. The first of those is Jason Merrill, who you may know as the co-host of Order of Battle. Here he is. Hello, Jason. Welcome back to the show.
Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Excellent stuff. It's morning for you. It's evening for me. You're Central Time, right?
Yes, so it's noon here while you're cooking dinner.
Yeah, I've just had my dinner. Bacon pasta. So thanks for joining us again. And we've got a new person to our show, at least on screen and on audio, but has sort of been somewhat of a friend of the show for a little while. And I do have a jingle.
Bryan, a real American Bryan.
Fantastic.
There we go. Is there room for two real Americans here? Or three? I'm not, I don't want to rule anyone out. Certainly not four.
Welcome, Brian.
Hello.
How's it going? Where are you today, Brian?
I'm in my Real American Bryan studio in Indiana, but I'm very happy to be joining you guys. It's an honor. Thank you.
Great to have you on. Yeah, I've been thinking about how do we bring you into our fold, and it occurred to me as we're doing this that you'd be a great person to be talking about the future of G.I. Joe comics. And we're live today, so we'll have other people who will be, welcome to chime in the comments. I think we've got one of your friends in the comments already, Johnny P.
Indeed,
Hello.
yes.
Hello, Johnny. Thanks for chiming in.
We have got Backwards. Hello, Backwards. And we have got someone who may have opinions and thoughts of the future of the G.I. Joe comics, but is probably NDA'd. Diana Davis. She's excited to see what we want. Wow. Good to have you on board too. I missed the memo about the beard. Oh, I haven't had a shave today, but
I think it's safe to say that the three of us have lifelike hair, and Mark is a '60s Joe, not a late '60s, '70s Joe.
And Backwards says that he's been on the ground floor with you, Brian. He's one of your first 25 subscribers.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you, Backwards.
We've also got a Facebook user who says, "Hey guys," Facebook user. There should be a link in the post which says that you can click on, which will give StreamYard permission to see what your name is. Otherwise, you could just write it if that's easier. So, before we get into it, I think, Tim, you wanted to explore what's over Brian's shoulders, because his room does look interesting, doesn't it?
Brian, I see some CGC graded G.I. Joe comics sealed in lucite. I see an Andrew Wildman cover. I see that Paul Ryan cover for SFX. I see issue 1. I see 26. I think I see 26. What else? Yep. I see 155. I see Devil's Due 1. What's the first one on the left? What's the fifth one?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first one is the Helix issue. The fifth one is the Dead Game Virgin issue with Snake Eyes.
Okay. Oh, and then is that white one between 26 and the Treasury edition? Is that the Hama sketch cover with Snake Eyes' boots?
Yep. Yeah, and the 3 on the far end are the Treasury editions.
Oh, right. Okay. And then behind you in general is this is a mixture of comics and Star Wars and Joe. Is there a certain focus, or is it a little of everything?
A little bit of everything, but mostly Joe. I think half of the cabinets are classified Joe figures. Then a bunch of my Joe books are over here.
Cool.
And Jason, are you just in your lounge? I think I can see a roadblock and maybe a snow job just over your shoulder.
So when I normally do video, I'm in the other room with the bookshelf and all the toys, but right now we have the flag set up and all of our Sky Strikers up. So I'm in my bedroom.
I saw this.
Yeah. So that way is a graffitied APC, the Nomura Star Blazers, everybody's favorite Cobra. There's my roadblock display. And this is actually a test shot of Roadblock 94. So it's basically a big roadblock room.
And just over your shoulder behind you, do we see 2 boxes of Sky Strikers?
Yes.
And a cat. A small black cat.
I have one in my lap and one asleep behind me.
Okay. It's funny because with the way that your camera is, the Sky Striker the box looks so small.
Yeah, but we got 2 of the HasLab Sky Strikers. I would have loved to have ordered 5, but 2 was what the wallet could afford at the time. We Cobra stickered one of them, which I thought was silly when they announced it, but in hand, it's a lot of fun, and the stickers are fantastic. So even though a year ago I was like, oh, that's dumb, today I was like, hell yeah, no Joe right on the side of the Sky Striker, which happens to me a lot. There's a lot of G.I. Joe that as an adult, I went, that's kind of dumb. And then I got it in hand and I went, I love it with all my heart. So we have 13 Sky Strikers in the air today. Well, A does.
There's only so many that can fit on the flag. I sort of hesitate to wonder how they actually take off, but that's a problem for the logistics boffins, isn't it? It's
the 11-year-old and the air boss. Yeah.
My brother's childhood Sky Striker is down the hallway in the other room. When the last 3 moves in the last 20 years, it's the toy that, because it's sort of big, didn't always easily go into storage. It's like, well, that can just go on top of that box, and then all of a sudden it's on my wife's dresser. All of a sudden it's been on her dresser for 6 months.
They make some nice acrylic displays that it can either be banked or, in vertical lift. So we use the vertical lift because they are so large and we don't want to hang them because we want to play with them. So the vertical lift stands allow us to line up like 9 or 10 of them on top of a bookshelf without being too intrusive to the rest of the house.
Cool. Let's get into talking about comics. And let's break up with a little jingle.
Hot and pathetic.
I like this. Mark, is the rooster pathetic? Are we pathetic for doing a filler episode? Are our viewers pathetic for watching a filler episode? What is pathetic today? Or is it in quotes? And it's and that's just what Beachhead says.
It's just what Beachhead says.
Okay.
His, you know, I don't want to sort of, you know, push too much of my own interpretation of Beachhead's feelings about us and the show and our listeners. You know, draw your own conclusions. So we are gathered here today to sort of ask some questions about the future of the comics, and I've sort of divided this into Larry's world, the ARAH book, 301 and beyond, and what else might be going on. So this is the question that I asked over on Facebook. What would you like from the Larry Hama written book for 301 and beyond? And so as it's on the screen, let's continue with what my initial thoughts were. Let's take a break from some of the overused concepts, brainwave scanner and blue ninjas. And I say that, and in the next breath, I'm but also there's so much there. Like, you know, there's the brainwave scanner and the blue ninjas. There's been an awful lot of them in the recent books, and so I think, you know, we could do with a break from them. I think there's an appetite for a break, but at the same time, it's like there's that Cobra Casino concept and everyone going in there, and the idea that maybe some of these guests might be brainwashed, and then there's like, you know, the with the blue ninjas. It would seem a shame that after such a long period of them being so key to the ongoing plot, that just disappeared, and that plot kind of wasn't sort of resolved a little bit more neatly than just let's stop using them. What do you guys think about those two specific plot points, the brainwave scanner and the blue ninjas? Bryan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I think it's time for a break, but I don't want either of those things to be forgotten either. Like let's keep them on the back burner, but let's breathe a little bit and take a little break from these overused concepts, but we'll come back to them. I don't want them to be forgotten forever.
Fair. Jason?
Well, we have to have the brainwave scanner to catch new Snake Eyes back up to what he missed. One and to clear the cobwebs out of both Sean and Dawn. But you know, once the Rhyming Twins and Snake Eyes are back to full speed, yeah, they could mothball that for a little while. I've never really been a big fan of the Blue Ninjas. It makes the comic feel a little bit more like the early 90s when it was kind of in its worst period. So he could never show them again and I wouldn't miss them. It'd be fun to see him come up with another third entity or third party, but or change the way he's using them. But the Blue Ninjas could dirt nap for all I care. It's the weakest part of the Larry's run for me.
This is what I've been thinking about with the Blue Ninjas, using them in a different way. I feel like the note that Hama has been hitting with them has been a similar note the whole time. And, you know, like the humans are all meat puppets. And what was starting in the 290s was the Blue Ninjas now saw Cobra as some kind of enemy or entity to be infiltrated. And I don't remember really what happens in Artificial Intelligence. I know that Destro and the Baroness are fighting some Blue Ninjas, but I feel like the Blue Ninjas plan has been a little nebulous. And if they were to specifically go after like Cobra Commander, or specifically go after Broca Beach or Cobra Island, the problem with me saying that is that that's not really the way that Hama writes. He doesn't come up with plot point first. He's sort of thinking about what the characters would do. And a comment that I made to Mark several episodes ago when we were talking about some of these final issues was that there's been this sort of like deflation or stakes creep of the Blue Ninjas, where when we first met them, they were so hard to destroy. And then the Joes figured out, like, we'll just shoot them in the head. And now when the Joes fight them, they seem easily dispatched because maybe you don't need like 4 pages each time of the Joes saying, oh man, this ninja robot is so hard to stop. But it's like you've got the sort of 2 toughest things in all of G.I. Joe, a ninja and a robot. And so if they're going to stick around, I'm not actually rooting for every time they show up it being half an issue to take even one out and some Joes get injured. But if they're going to show up, I do want them handled in a different way. But I do feel like just for, even if 301 is kind of one, I do want them to show up somehow in the first, 10 issues.
Well, I would like too to hear more about the fighting style with Helix's mom and stuff. That I felt like that was a story thread that was started and then just kind of like forgotten about, and we moved on past it. I think there's some
that's my dilemma. That there are those little interesting things that were introduced that it would be nice to follow up, like the Helix connection with her mum's fighting style, and so that's for me is kind of where it's a shame that if we wouldn't see them again, it would be good to touch on those potentially more interesting bits. Just the bit where the Blue Ninjas decide, Alpha 001 or whoever decides, okay, this week we're going to attack Destro. This week we're going to attack the Joes again. Or this week we're going to attack Cobra. Or this week the G.I. Joe team is going to attack our factory again. It's that element of it feeling like it's not really advancing, and also as it feels a little bit like they're just being used to some degree as cannon fodder, just something that the Joes can easily fight with, dispatch, destroy, with, as you say, a diminishing sense of jeopardy.
Also, they're sort of like Cobra bats in that there are an infinite number of them. And what's interesting to me is Alpha 001 as a character, and some concern that Alpha 001 could run out of supplies or Blue Ninjas. Because if there are like 75 million of them, then they're always going to be a problem. If there was, and again, this is an artificial sort of plot layer, but if the factory blew up and there were only 13 left, or 26 left, or 3 left, then it's more like slice and dice as opposed to all of the Night Creepers. And then the Joes could speak differently, or Alpha 001 could speak differently about, well, I only have this many left, so I'm going to use them for this mission. Or, okay, Joes, intelligence says that there's only 17 Blue Ninjas left, so now the reader has sort of a countdown, even if Hama's not going to go very far with that. But as long as there are an infinite number, it becomes nebulous, and it's not like boxed in at all. And I want it to be boxed in a little bit.
That's a good pull.
Let's move on, I guess, to the next point that I had. Before we do that, sort of an important news briefing here from French Toast Chopsticks manga of Real American Bryan is so handsome. Thanks for that update.
We're all having problems with that.
Being too handsome?
No, with him being too handsome. Bryan is too handsome. It's
a distraction. Yeah, it's hard to keep focused. So the next one was use more characters than that we don't see in the book so much. There are more Cobra characters than just Mindbender. We could see someone like Gristle or Tombstone, one of these characters that hasn't, has been introduced as a toy but hasn't really been used as a comic character, or bring back another of the big characters like Tomax and Zaymot, who have been used before, but not a great deal. This IDW ARAH arc is very much on the Cobra side, the Mindbender and Cobra Commander show in terms of the Cobra leadership. So it would be good to see just a bit more variety of characters that we used. I have joked before that it would be nice to just have a little turn that shows Mindbender was never resurrected as a clone. It's just a phantom of Cobra Commander's imagination, a bit like Tyler Durden figure in his that he's brought to life in his mind. What do you make of that, Tim? Seeing as how I've stolen your idea about Gristle and Tombstone.
No, thank you. I really want to see Scrap Iron. And in general, Copperhead and Major Blood and, etc. Mindbender has become sort of too many things for Cobra Commander. And my creative partner many years ago said to me, do you know why Bane is in Batman and Robin, the Joel Schumacher film from 1997? And I said, oh, well, to sell toys. And he said, yeah. But narratively, he's there. So Poison Ivy isn't talking to herself. Like it's like Watson for Sherlock Holmes, so Holmes can explain it to a character on screen and explain it to the audience. And Mindbender is such an amazing character, and clearly Hama has affection for him, but he's both sort of Cobra Commander's like sounding board and conscience, and not quite second in command, but he's there all the time, and he's his inventor, and he's his interrogator. And one of the things that I love so much about G.I. Joe happens in the first issue I ever read, issue 90, where Destro has this flowchart and he's dividing up how Cobra is going to work with Broca Beach and Zorana and Fred in the battle armor and Voltar, and they're bickering, and we have lost some of the power struggle or some of the tiers of power, and Scrap Iron's dossier, that line about him wanting to blow up the world, is such a funny Larry Hama ism from 1984 or 85 that he's never been in the comic very much anyway. And this seems like a character that if someone could remind Hama, like, no, this guy is great, you can do a lot with this. So selfishly, I'm picking that guy because I've always loved his costume and his accessories. But, with someone like Tombstone, I don't remember quite when Hama was or wasn't writing some of the file cards in the 2000 teens. So I'm not sure if Hama sort of knows about Tombstone or feels any connection to him. And there are some later figures in the original Real American Hero run where Hama's not writing the dossiers because he quit and they didn't have him back yet, or they were bringing some of that work in house. And sometimes you can tell when you read it, it just feels sort of super heroic and not nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So I'd have to think about Gristle. So maybe Hama doesn't know about Gristle, doesn't care about Gristle, but absolutely more than just Mindbender.
I popped up on the screen there, message on the Facebook group replying to my original question from Stephen Miller, who I think it's fair to say is a Scrap Iron fan. We'll be glad to hear that he's being made into a classified figure. So his request was definitely more Scrap Iron, and as people that have read the original Battle Action Force comics, one of the highlights of those books was that they would have these solo stories where they focus, have a solo adventure with some of these secondary characters, often having an origin story for them. And so there was a codename the Scrapyard story featuring Scrap Iron doing what he does best.
Brian, what do you think about Mindbender and Gristle and Tombstone and Scrap Iron and other characters?
Well, one of the things that I think would be a really cool concept going forward is kind of building off of those a little bit. I'd like to see a splintering of the evil forces that Joe's fighting. So have Serpentor Khan lead his army, and then have Cobra Commander's army, and maybe bring Alcabra and have him leading the force, and Destro. So that way the Joes are spread out more too. You could bring the Red Shadows back. You do all kinds of things, and then you have Joe forces that are, have threats all over the place, rather than having this huge roster focused on, Cobra Island or the Cobra Casino. Like, with all the Joes you have and the forces you have, you should be able to take that out pretty easily. But if you're spread thin across the globe, then now there becomes some real danger and intrigue.
It was it was a really exciting plot point of the Murder by Assassination, was the introduction of some new characters to the Cobra cast, new and different. So the introduction of Alcabra as a kind of a real threat, and this Overkill as a new kind of mysterious secondary character. It was really fun to see. Jason, what are your thoughts about that one?
So my first thought was Scrap Iron, which Tim eloquently went long on, and I love it. We used to army build Scrap Iron because there was Scrap Iron, and then we had the Iron Guard, which were all the other Scrap Irons that followed Scrap Iron. But in that realm of Mindbender, Scrap Iron, on his file card, he's a weapons inventor. He works for Destro. So he's a nice go-between between the two organizations. He builds things. Then you have Hotwire, who's never been in the comic. I don't know if Larry's aware of him, but he was a club convention scientist guy. So he would be a great, you start to build out that science division. We have the Techno Viper that's been very big at the end of the comic to,
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey, take off the helmet, make him a real person. Or her a real person, and you start to build that whole side of it, and then take them out of leadership. I miss, you mentioned the issue 90, Tim, with the flow chart and all the infighting, and then you go all the way back to pre-20, and them sitting around the table, argue, each of them having their own thoughts against each other while voicing their united front, and I do miss that. There's plenty of ways, bringing in Tombstone or whoever, to bring up a natural Cobra hierarchy. Even when you think about the Crimson Guard who just defected, they don't all have to defect. And then having Major Blood not part of leadership, but what he's supposed to be is a hired gun. Having him come in and out, working for different factions, everything Brian said I love it, because as you start to break that down, I want more special missions than I want the same 15 Joes on the same C-130 flying over the same island. Yeah,
that issue with Major Blood on the front cover, where he's about to draw his pistol with Lady Jade sort of knelt down in front of him. And those couple of issues I thought was a great change of pace. It was like a really exciting action story, and also just stepping away from some of those the Blue Ninjas and the brainwave scanner, and featuring this really dastardly character of Blood in such a cool way. I thought those are probably two of my favorite. They'd definitely be in my top 10 of the IDW run.
I wouldn't also mind just seeing a stronger Cobra Commander. Cobra Commander is always at his best when he's the demagogue, leading the disenfranchised masses, and willing to kill his own son and kick a puppy. And not that I want to see him kick puppies again. It's an awful thing in the comic. But that version of Cobra Commander, having him be kind of punked by Serpentor or by Fred or whomever, was always the weakest of the commanders. And although we all love Chris Latta's voice, he's the weakest of the commanders. I want a strong commander.
I think that's a really really good thought as well, and I know that a friend of the show, Steve Jubber, has got strong feelings on this one as well. That sort of menacing, ruthless, real threat character that Cobra Commander can pose when he's at his best, and we've seen a little bit less of that of little bit, slightly more chaotic and on the back foot, and not really ever progressing anywhere with his grand schemes.
And asking old people in a casino why they're not gambling more.
Yeah,
that's
asking if they've tried the dip. Yeah,
that's fun. That's silly. And
it's silly's for the cartoon. Silly is for the comic too, but the teeth of the comic is what gives the silliness, its breadth and its leeway. Whereas the vice versa in the cartoon.
Let's have him do something that sort of really sort of brings back the edge. We've sort of used the example from the IDW books where he puts in a couple of I think they're like city officials in the back of a car and sort of shoots them through the hood. Old hood. Anyway,
it still needs to be for kids. Like, I'm not saying it needs to be for us as we walk into our 50s, because it's a bit myopic, but we all remember G.I. Joe being a little bit above us, right? And now it's good. It's by default, it's going to be below us. We're, in our 40s and 50s and such, but having it be a comic book for kids, but a little elevated, was what made G.I. Joe special. And it doesn't have to be just for me today. It needs to be for that same, it's serious with a hint of funny. It gets the middle schooler or the teenager hot-blooded instead of, yes, why aren't you gambling more?
there's a scale, in terms of like top level menace versus just silliness, and we just want to dial back the buffoonery a tiny bit.
I do want to defend that scene in the casino, because I think heading towards issue 300 being a final issue or not being a final issue is an unusual scenario for a writer to be in. And I think Hama may have been, in showing the commander that relaxed and comfortable and sort of light, I think whatever did happen next or now will happen next is the teeth, is the contrast. And so that scene in and of itself, I don't have a problem with. It's going to be great. What I also mean is that I think Hama is writing this character as, he thinks he's untouchable, and sort of narratively, we always want Cobra Commander to like walk around and be cruel and be evil, but no, he feels incredibly safe on his island, and it's a Ponzi scheme. Cobra's a Ponzi scheme, right? So yes, you get people into this casino and you take their money, and maybe you also brainwash them. So but yes, I'm ready for sort of the contrast where like now he's going to attack the Joes, or going to we saw that a little bit in 300 or 299 with taking the people hostage and putting them on the sort of the porch so that the Joes could see them, but that was not sort of the like most dramatic beat of that issue, so it doesn't stand out as much. But had that been staged differently, had the issue been more about that, we might be having a different discussion now. Like, oh man, Cobra Commander took all those gamblers and vacationers out into the porch. But yes.
And I think there was some power struggle on that side of things where, Splinter Khan or whatever is trying to take Cobra away from Cobra Commander. Then I think you have that option of making him more evil and darker, and as he responds to that, trying to hold on to what he has.
Point.
Does that lead right back to Cobra Island, the Cobra Civil War? I mean, we don't want to just jump right back into that, right?
Diana Davis says, remember, the commander comes from a sales business background. He knows how to be lethal behind the scenes and schmooze to get them to do what he wants.
I think that scene would have landed better for me if it hadn't been followed up with Serpentor just knocking him around like a child. Because that's what Diana just said is what I just referenced as well. It's the thing that I love about Cobra Commander is he was a demagogue. He came from that disenfranchised, ultimate victim mentality and weaponized it. And then, weaponized everyone else that felt like him, but didn't have the charisma to follow. And I love that Cobra Commander. As a child, I was blown away by that whole idea. And no matter what version of G.I. Joe has been written in and outside of Sunbow and Larry, that is the version of Cobra Commander that has always stuck with me.
Yeah, I think the point about the sort of the 1-2 beat of that Cobra Commander sort of schmoozing with the guests is an interesting one, because he's not schmoozing with the guests because he genuinely wants them to be happy and having a fun time in his casino. Really, it's because he's the snake trying to charm them so that he can get them in and exploit them and follow up with his grand scheme, the whatever it was, the brainwashing laundry project that we haven't yet found out about the details of. So yeah, it's. Yeah, if we had seen the kind of the bite, the menace behind that element, then it I think would have probably landed slightly differently to him, instead of it the follow up being okay, and now he's got beaten up by Serpentel Khan. Let's
we go back to the questions, Mark.
I was just looking at the comments that have just come in. Shane just sort of noted that around characters and specialities and what that means for storytelling, I guess. Characters have lots of specialities. Scrap Iron as the weapons designer, Zap used to co-pilot, Snowjob as a sniper. Lots of potential for characters to do different things. Yeah, I mean, just sort of looking back at some of those characters and thinking what it might suggest for scenarios that would play out in the stories is quite interesting. Lots of opportunity there. Josh had a very specific question about the future of the comics, which was any ideas on the last IDW trade paperback release, which is likely the end of IDW runs, likely when the announcement of the next publisher happens. So when we spoke to Hasbro's Michael Kelly, he reminded us that the license to print the back matter will pass along to the new publisher, and so I'm sure they will be very conscious that there is this hole in the reprints of the trade paperbacks, because the last volume is, I think, it takes up to, is it 285 or something like that? So there's a gap of about 15 issues in terms of the reprints. So I would think that shortly after we find out who the publisher is and they start getting going, that probably within a few months they'll try and do that TPB to fill in the gaps. Tim?
I know a comic book store in Massachusetts that has the final 15 issues for cover price.
It's interesting. I saw in the comments relating to this on another board that someone said that they just don't read floppies, and they've not read these final issues. They will wait for the trade paperback whenever that happens.
I think it's possible that the new publisher will not, in the first 6 months, issue a collection of the final IDW issues because they would just want to focus on their material. So if they do a new series and a second new series and maybe like a mini series 6 months in, then 6 months in, 12 months in, that's 2 or 3 collections of their new material. And they're making a big splash with their new stuff. And to say, oh, also the final 15 issues, it's like, the first thing that Marvel did when it got the Star Wars license after it ended at Dark Horse was make its own stuff and reprint its own new stuff, and then announce reprinting its own old stuff from the 70s and 80s. And then they got to the Dark Horse stuff.
I think the counterpoint to that is just in terms of this final volume, and I think I agree about most of the other IDW stuff. Reprinting that is not going to be a priority, but because this last volume has never been reprinted, And because one of their first issues will be 301, which picks up from a cliffhanger of 300,
which we assume picks up.
We assume we've been told.
I've always been stunned by the first page of issue 97, which is a couple of Joes hiding behind a car getting shot, and it does not pick up after 96. It doesn't pick up after some Joes do damage to basically the Cobra embassy in New York City. And there's, like sometimes Hama just jumps ahead and starts another mission. But
kind of when he's at his best, honestly.
Yes, this is a Hama-ism that I love, where there's a cliffhanger. I feel like this is sort of the anti-Bendis, right? Like I read a Brian Michael, and I like Brian Michael Bendis comics, but his stuff is very moment to moment, and there's a cliffhanger, and then I read the next issue, and the next issue of Avengers or Spider-Man or something tends to be the next moment. And Hama will sometimes jump ahead an hour, a day, a week, or we're just on the C-130 somewhere else. It's like, I guess Chuckles is investigating the Hindu Kush, and I'm going to have to wait to know what happened to, Roadblock in that car or whatever. Should we go
there was a question prompted by one of your comments. Jim Smith needs the name of that comic book store, and I can do better than just giving the name. I can play something.
Hub Comics! Your local comic store. Hub Comics. In Boston to explore. Hub Comics. Your local comic store. Hub Comics. Comics and much more.
Hub Comics in Somerville near Boston. Check out hubcomics.com for details.
Hub Comics.
That's nice. Thank you. We don't have all of those classic collections that are in that screen cap and that ad. Some of them we no longer have.
It's a destination more than it's a shop.
But we do have a lot of issues at G.I. Joe. Should we go to the next question, which I think we were bridging to anyway?
Let's do it. So the next one, the next point was, can we have some return of classic G.I. Joe artists? Vosberg, Wiggum, Wagner. Maybe we could have a flashback story set during their era of G.I. Joe. We could have a story from set during the issue 30s or 40s or 50s from Wiggum. Could have something, during the middle of the Civil War from Wagner. We could have something back in the green uniform days from Vosberg. What do you think? What do you think about that idea?
Brian, you go first.
I think it's a fantastic idea. I'd be very excited to see so many of those artists we haven't seen do any Joe for so long. That it'd be just, I don't know, it'd be a nostalgia trip and a nostalgia property. And I think that'd be a phenomenal idea. I'd be very excited about it. I don't know how likely it is, but I hope it happens.
Jason, chime in.
I would love to see it. I would love to see Michael Golden come back and some others. At the same time, I would love to see them pull in whoever the hot artists that people are following today. Not because I don't love our old guys, but I want new eyes on Joe, and I don't know how much Vosberg or Golden is going to pull in the new audience, but it's certainly, I would backflip. It would look bad and I'd probably break my neck, but I would try to backflip if some of these older folks would do it.
Diana Davis says, I would be surprised if Vosberg agreed to do it. I asked him if he wanted to do a cover for Saturday Morning Adventures, and he wasn't really into it. I think Vosberg there are artists who have worked on G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe does not pay royalties. So when IDW reprinted Marvel issues, the artists who drew those issues and the guy who wrote them don't get paid again. If you draw a Spider-Man story in 1983 or 2009, and then a year or 5 later, Marvel reprints it, you get $5 or $10 or $20 per page. And the artists who have drawn many, many, many issues at Marvel, that becomes a small but nice revenue stream. Because if you've done popular books that stay in print, if you did like a year on X-Men and they always go back to that year, you get quarterly checks. And G.I. Joe does at IDW. G.I. Joe did not pay those kinds of royalties. And similarly for the artists who were drawing new issues at IDW, when 6 months later there was a collection, they did not get a royalty. And a new publisher could make a different agreement. Some of the dollars and cents of it may argue against that if a new publisher is paying a lot of money to have the license from Hasbro and is like giving Hasbro a cut of all of its profits, in the way that if a publisher has something homegrown that they own, they're not also sending some money over to a toy company. In terms of returning artists to G.I. Joe, I would love to see it. I don't want to necessarily. Okay, I'm of two minds, because if there's a story set during like Rod Wigham's run, I'd love it if Wiggum drew that. But I also don't like the standard that sets, where like this happens a lot at Marvel, where there's a flashback to the 60s and Marvel has an artist draw it kind of like Jack Kirby, or the artist just does it because they want to. And that's really fun. And that's a good visual cue for us. Like, oh, okay, this is taking place during the 60s and with these older comics. But it starts to suggest that a story that takes place in the past can only be drawn with an old school style, or that a flashback needs to be drawn in a different style from the contemporary story. And if you extend that forward, it starts to pigeonhole artists. So if you had a run of G.I. Joe right now, and a younger artist who draws in a very modern style was drawing it, and you had a flashback, like there might be a small cue, like the colorist does it in sepia tones or black and white or a limited palette, or maybe the artist like draws it with a little less detail or inks it a little differently. Like that's fun. Like we have flashbacks in movies with sort of a different soundscaping or sepia tones or black and white. But when it becomes sort of the whole visual style, it then starts to argue that like, oh, you couldn't have Rod Wiggham draw a new story for G.I. Joe, a contemporary story, because his art is for like the older stuff. And even though I would like to see that, I don't want an artist to get pigeonholed. And I want Marvel to be able, for example, to be able to tell a story that takes place, like 5 minutes after like Spider-Man gets his powers. And I want them to, if they want to hire the like hot new artist who draws in a modern style, to draw that story that way. And so I'd like to keep it more open, where if a returning artist to G.I. Joe is interested in drawing a G.I. Joe story, then the discussion is more like, well, what is the story that they want to do for G.I. Joe or with Larry, as opposed to like, well, where can we put them that makes sense? And I think it might be disappointing to admit that some of the returning artists, though that would mean a lot to longtime fans, it might not move the needle in a catalog for new readers and like store owners who are ordering that. It's like right now, 4 days from now, an issue of X-Men Legends is coming out, written and drawn by Whilce Portacio, part 2 of a story that takes place right before Uncanny X-Men 282, his second issue of X-Men from 1991, when Bishop first appears. And it's like what Bishop did right before that issue. And I thought when this was announced, cool. And I read the first issue, it was okay. I don't, it's like he should be able to draw like current issues of X-Men. I don't like the whole point of that X-Men comic, X-Men Legends, is it's like these are stories that like fill in some gaps or it takes place in the past. I
think the difference for maybe why you might do that with Wiggum and why you might do it with Portacio as well is that if it's less connected to the current, chronology, current issues, and it's just one issue, then maybe that's an easier commitment, and it's also a smaller deadline pressure as well.
Yes,
just get this thing done, we can drop it in.
Thank you. As a separate point that I was going to forget to make, if it was a series like G.I. Joe Spotlight or G.I. Joe Origins or G.I. Joe Secret Missions, and it's 1 or 2 issues at a time, or an annual or a yearbook, totally. And what I actually really want, a large. I want Hama to write more than one monthly. I want more than 20 or 22 pages a month, whether that's double-sized issues, bi-weekly shipping, a second series, a like rotating, a revolving series of mini series that in effect is a monthly series, or many, many specials. There are so many characters that it's hard to tell a lot of story and sort of satisfy many fans, because it's like, well, within a couple issues I can include these 9 characters, and someone out there is like, well, what about Scrap Iron, right? Or like, what about like Frostbite? We haven't seen Frostbite in a while. So and the thing that I think, since there is this nostalgia and we're coming out of the anniversary, and I feel like the G.I. Joe declassified miniseries, the 3 issues from Devil's Due, like that never fully satisfied me. What I actually want specifically is some like G.I. Joe 1980 or 81 or 82 miniseries, whether you call it that or not. Whoever draws it, I would like a story, a miniseries that can be a bigger book that you could give someone that's like early G.I. Joe or right before issue 1, because that's in the same way that Hama's self-contained issues in the last 5 issues have been like free of like continuity and the ongoing story. And you could give one of those issues to anyone who's hasn't read G.I. Joe in a while. So to Mark's like specific idea, like maybe it takes place during the Cobra Civil War, like maybe it takes place. I feel like in the first year or before the first year is particularly ripe, both for storytelling and for readers.
I think you could have the classic artists come back and have new artists at the same time, because we're not just going to have one title here. The new publisher is going to have multiple titles, so we could have a book that has that retro feel for the older crowd that's getting into it, and then we could have the new hotter artist on another title trying to bring new readers into the property as well.
Surely though, do you guys think it's likely that there will be a Hama book that continues Real American Hero and another book that starts a different kind of G.I. Joe, that's like G.I. Joe that's starting for the first time in 2023, or like the Paul Allor World on Fire continuity? Do you think there's going to be something different that's not Hama?
Hope so.
Yeah, I mean,
Jason, you go first. Well, Mark's reminding us.
Michael Kelly said as much, that there will be, there'll be at least 2 books, that there'll be the Hamaverse continuing, and there'll be something else for that will be doing something else, and without too much clues as to what that something else could be. And yeah, my speculation was one question would be, would you want it to be absolutely something else completely different, or would you want it somehow to be running alongside Hama, not causing him too much problems in terms of keeping everything consistent, but happening at the same time, just like Larry Hama might be writing a Batman book, and then you've got another writer writing another Batman book, all set within the same universe, which is something that did happen. So would you want that? And I guess there's precedent in terms of like the Helix backstory, for example, that was written by somebody else in the ARAH universe. Would you want it to be entirely separate, or would you want it to potentially run along parallel to the ARAH universe? Because I guess for me, having it completely separate, might mean that they can do their own thing, and it might be very bold and exciting, but maybe to some degree it might sort of matter less because the ARAH is the real G.I. Joe universe.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have, that was actually one of on my wish list for the new publisher. I would like to have something else that's in the ARAH universe, but maybe not necessarily written by Larry, but in that, because then you could spread out and have a bigger roster. So you could have these characters are in Larry's book, these characters are in the other book, but it's all happening in the same universe, in the same continuity. And then you get to see those characters you don't get too often.
Jason?
Yeah. So Diana Davis, right as I was about to talk, it hits us with the perfect one. It's hard for another writer to write in Hama's Joe verse, since the way Larry writes, it's hard not to accidentally contradict events or go off canon. And kind of what she's saying and what Brian's saying, it would be nice to have another writer come into Larry's universe, not to be too morbid, but due to Larry's age, and Larry's the boss, and he's writing, something off panel that Larry is approving, agreeing to, pitching to him, something, or her, some writer that can come in and sit down with Larry and not take over, but add flavor, add color commentary, and when the day that we all get to happens is already well and meaty invested. But I do agree that non-Larry Joe, it has less importance, is less whatever, but I love it. I loved how much anger Aubrey Citizen's G.I. Joe caused, because that's headlines. We need headlines. We don't have the viewership, or we don't have the readership that like, say, Batman does, where you can have two congruent writers still in the same basic ass universe, whatever. So somebody like Citizen, who's going to cause controversy, somebody like Paul Allor, who's going to create this beautiful, grounded, modern, realistic, still a little bit of joy, someone who's doing the Saturday morning stuff that's just silly beyond silly, a Sigma 6, a Renegade, something that pushes the envelope, maybe makes some people angry, maybe shows you a Snake Eyes or or a Law and Order that we're not used to, giving us that new little right? Because we have lots of YouTube guys that are making their own play action things, not Larry Hama, not canon, completely unimportant in the Hama verse, but you watch those. Jubber, one of your co-hosts, is part of that world, and we watch them, and we're inspired, and we're hungry for more. But ultimately, it doesn't matter because Larry didn't write it, right? So I want something that pushes beyond what we're comfortable with. I want something new and crazy, but I would love to see somebody sit down with Larry and pick up and maybe add color commentary to his universe, and is someone that we can trust with the universe if Larry ever decides to put the pencil down.
I like where Jason's going, that Hama could be something of an editor to a second Joe book with a second Joe writer, and that these two books could be in the Hama verse. But to hear one or two viewers chime in, and Jason also, like a Paul Allor World on Fire book, I think we run the risk of a second book that is like Hama, sort of agrees with Hama, but isn't technically him writing, that just ends up being the spin-off where the readership of it is 60% of the main book. And that doesn't do us any good, besides like me just wanting more pages of story. And what you get for a Snake Eyes Dead Game, for a Sierra Muerte, and to some extent for a World on Fire, is attention. And it's funny because there are some comparisons, and they don't all work all the way. Like, one comparison is X-Men. You have Chris Claremont writing Uncanny X-Men for a long time. He's the only person writing that book, and then he's the only person writing that book from 75 to 82 when New Mutants shows up. Right? There's a spinoff, and he's writing it at the beginning, and later on, someone else takes that over, and then later on, there's another spinoff, X Factor, and because there are so many characters and there's an editor or editors, like those 2 books, those 3 books agree. even if they have sort of a different flavor and different cast, and then they can have crossovers and make money. But what you don't have there is something like an X-Men cartoon that's sort of also grabbing the spotlight and elevating the brand. So like G.I. Joe has these two poles, or maybe these three poles. You have all the stories from Hama, you have the cartoon, which everyone just knows the cartoon, even if they haven't really watched it. And then you, of course, have the toys. I don't know that sort of an ongoing Saturday morning adventures could sustain itself. I don't know that a year later, 2 years later, there's enough affection for that, because what you ultimately want is like movement and voices and sound effects and music. And maybe those 4 issues were like just enough of a, like an appetizer for us. If we're going to get another one of those, please, 5 issues. I need a little more story. But I do feel like what a Rob Liefeld brings to a Snake Eyes Dead Game, and what a Michel Fiffe brings to Sierra Muerte, even if it's not going to be like writer-artist-auteur, even if it's going to be just like some high-profile writer-artist team, I think that might be more valuable to the brand and compete less. And I think even though Michael Kelly makes this like central point that he's like, we need to grow and evolve the brand, and I ask readers to give it a shot. He said this when World on Fire was introduced. He's been saying it more recently. I think that something like Dead Game and Sierra Muerte and you know, Transformers versus G.I. Joe by Scioli, because they're discrete, they like every 6 months, every 4 months, every year, they can like shake it up. And maybe you don't get all of them because you don't like one of those creatives. I think if, as much as like Paul Allor's universe like should have continued and been indefinite, you end up, that's sort of not different enough, and it's similar enough that someone who only wants one G.I. Joe book will skip it, and it's not, and it's different enough anyway. I think we need we need some mini series that are different. As much as I want Hama to magically write 2 books or a second writer to work with him.
We agree on this, because that is the beauty of G.I. Joe. And when you talk about Allor and Fiffe and everybody else, is that we have the best of both worlds. We have the big 2, this never ends, 300 issues, goes on forever, like X-Men or Avengers. And we have the independent comic, this is a beautiful story, why did it have to go away? Oh, here's another beautiful story. Oh, it's going to go away too. Like, you know, they're killing the children, right? It just, oh, it's over. I didn't want it to be over. I could have read double that.
Not to swipe at low-hanging fruit, but I do think as exciting as all of the variant covers for Dead Game and the like attention that announcement of that miniseries got, I do think that miniseries in terms of story and character didn't win anyone over.
No, that hurt us more than helped us.
So if we're going to do that again, it needs to be a stronger narrative with stronger characterization, even if the art is, you know, like a certain like narrow bandwidth.
In terms of a second Larry thing, just returning to the special missions format when he was doing in the 80s. Special missions came out, what, once every 2 months?
Until it went monthly. It went monthly around issue 17? 18?
Sure. But it was, what, 30 issues? It doesn't have to go monthly. It went monthly. But in terms of a new thing with Larry writing 2 things, or someone sitting with Larry as Larry, the editor, you take that special missions approach. You can then go to Helix's backstory. You can add in Gristle. You can add in Snowstorm, who's never seen the light of comics. You can go and you can have that second writer or Larry doing those characters that none of us have ever seen. We all want to see. Maybe we don't see them because he didn't write the file cards. Maybe we don't see them because he didn't give a shit and he's already got his plan, you know, but in everything I'm talking about with all the crazy, whatever, give us everything. It's very much in what you're saying, is that it's miniseries. I don't need 300 issues of Paul Allor, but I could have used more than 10 to 12.
Yeah, I really like the idea of like miniseries, like continuing miniseries, and you could do, and I still think they could still be in the ARAH universe or the Hama verse, where you could have and focus on like some of the sub factions of GI Joe. So you could have like a Tiger Force miniseries. You know, it's going to go for 5 or 6 issues, and you have some wild artist that's out of the normal and different writer on it, but it still kind of fits into that universe, and it could take place anywhere on the timeline too. So it's not going to cause any kind of conflict. And if you just like focus on smaller groups, I think the biggest thing, like one of the bigger complaints you always see online is that, well, my favorite character hasn't appeared in the comic for 100 issues because there's such a huge cast. Like, I think you just have to explore ways of getting different characters involved in other ways.
Mark, can you put up the comment that was before the previous one that mentioned Ninja Turtles?
Do that. I have to find it first. No, it's not that one.
So Adam S says, I feel like Real American Hero would work better the way Eastman works on IDW Ninja Turtles. So Ninja Turtles is up to issue 137 or so, and there've been a bunch of side miniseries. So if you combine those, it's almost like 200 issues, 250 issues. And Tom Waltz wrote the first 100 issues, and Sophie Campbell's been writing since issue 101. And Bobby Curnow and Kevin Eastman have been, and Tom Waltz have been sort of editorially involved the whole time. And so with the first 100 issues, Waltz was, I don't know to what extent just plot or like actual scripts or having every 6-month story meetings, but Waltz was bouncing ideas off of one of the co-creators and someone else. And that is continued after he left, although he's come back to write this big event miniseries. And Eastman also does 1 or 2 covers every single month. They tend to be the available B covers, not the the ratio incentives. And so if you are like me and you want one of the original guys very much involved, he is. And so I think that does speak to just how much goodwill and loyalty there is for Hama being involved in G.I. Joe, whether that's on this one book that he's writing, if he's also doing some sketch covers, if he's somehow involved with some other comics. I do think we're going to have, I wonder about the first 3 months, because when IDW launched, if I'm remembering this correctly, there was the 0 issue, which had a prologue story for all 3 series. And then each of these 3 different books launched. And I think it was staggered 1 per month. And that way they don't take each other's attention and you have some momentum over 3 months. But 3 books is a lot for this brand. Batman can sustain 4 monthly books, 25 family related books. It is actually that number right now. Half the DC line is related to Batman. And
he gets around for an orphan.
So, whenever the new publisher comes out with 301, we're going to have, a month or 6, I think, before the other thing or things start. And we all have some homework to do. I don't know how much my pleas in previous episodes of Talking Joe to get people to write emails to the IDW letters page to like say you're out there and to tell Hama what you want. I don't know how much that works, but in the next 6 months, we're all going to have to nudge our friends who are lapsed readers to not just get this new issue number 1 because it's exciting or because of variant covers, but to stick with this book and give it a real shot because the brand needs us.
I hope that Diana stays involved. I hope that they bring in new people. I would love to see some new writers, some new artists. I'm curious, back to an old question is, when they start doing reprints, are they going to go all the way back to issue 1? Or are they going to leave IDW's 15 trades available? like, I'm hungry for all of it, so I'm asking as someone who would continue to buy it, even though I have multiple copies.
Diana says, speaking on that, Tim, if you want the Hasbro live stream team to talk more comics, capital letters, please ask them in the stream. So
Would
I
they
think
even
what
see
this
it in the stream with everybody else just criticizing them?
I think what this is I think what this is speaking to, I don't spend a lot of time on the Hasbro stream, but I imagine the Hasbro live stream is very much about toys.
Mm-hmm.
And
they have said multiple times that they do pay attention to the comments. They go back and read them, etc. So,
so then we send them as much love as we can.
Yep.
All right. So two kinds of homework, everyone. You have to nudge your friends to buy the new series, and not just show up for the first month and a bunch of
At Hub Comics.
No, at many comic book stores. Please go to your local comic book store, and also to communicate with Hasbro in this very easy way that we can. Diana says, ask them in the stream, ask them in letters, ask them on social media.
We've spoken about the potential way that they might collect the story in the future, and I think if they were to just do what they've done before, that wouldn't be very exciting. People have already got a lot of those collections. They're out of print, but it's a smaller set of the market who don't have those things. So if they were to go and do something different, like a Walking Dead style 50-issue compendium, that would be something different and cool, and a really great way of getting a lot of story and catching up without having to buy lots of multiple books. I doubt they'll go keep on going with the hardcovers that IDW abandoned, because if those were selling great guns and being really profitable, they'd have kept on going. So
I have a blog post in me that it's going to be very hard to write, which I've been thinking about off and on for several years. I hope a new publisher can send some love toward reproduction, because I like the way the first 50 issues of the Marvel run look when they're reprinted, and I don't like the way issues 51 and up and Special Missions look, because of the assets that were available to IDW and the color studios that it was using. And it costs more money, and it requires more Photoshop care, and maybe asking collectors to scan pages in their collections and send in TIFFs of 11x17 art. But
original, right? Yeah.
But if you pick up the Serpentor hardcover that came out recently, and you turn the page from issue 50 to 51, it's you can just immediately see all the lines get crunchy. And anyways, I have a big blog post in me that I may try to write, which has some examples. And
I wouldn't even mind if they just scans the original issues without cleaning them up too much, because then you get on the paper in the scans that original slight yellowing and the paper texture and all of the imperfections that you had, which is how the colors were created, to be produced on that basis, and the sort of the vibrancy of the absolute crisp white paper and the really, really bold, bright colors in the modern editions. I know a lot of people find them unsympathetic. Brian, when are you doing your rereads? What's your preference? Do you go back to the original, slightly, newsprinty, yellowing paper, or would your preference be to go to a more modern, bright edition?
Well, so far in the rereads that I've been doing, I haven't hit that wall yet of getting past issue 50. I think I'm about at 40 right now. So I'll have decisions.
Did we lose Brian for a moment?
Brian has frozen.
Well, Brian will have a decision to make when he gets to Special Missions 1 and issue 51.
think
You're back,
Brian's back
Brian.
in the room.
So my preference would be to have new modern paper, but corrected colors, like Tim was talking about, more care put into them, so the artwork looks the way it's supposed to.
This will be like 3 paragraphs if I ever write this blog post. But if you're wondering, one of the details that I'm talking about is contrast. If you print 100% yellow in the 80s on dull absorbent newsprint, the relative brightness, the contrast between the bright yellow and the bright of the paper, which is to say they're not very bright, that is not a lot of contrast. If you put 100% yellow in modern printing on glossy, bright white paper, the difference between the yellow and the white is high, and also a ton of light is reflecting off of the paper from your light bulbs and the sun, and there are arguments to be made about, like, you make it look as good as it can, you make it look like it used to, you make it look like as good as it could have back then. There are philosophical, artistic arguments, but if nothing else, the black line needs more care.
We had a couple of comments that are sort of intersecting ideas. One of them was from Josh, saying that he wants stories pre-Marvel issue 1, and you were talking about maybe, G.I. Joe declassified type stories, even though you weren't 100% satisfied by that original series. I mentioned that in issue 225, which was a flashback to Duke's wife Claire being having this attempted rescue, that was this Proto Joe team that went to go and rescue her, which seemed interesting and ripe for exploring. One of those sort of seeds that sometimes Larry will plant that may bear fruit in future issues or not. Given that was 225 and we're now at 300, it has been a long delay, but it's something that I think would be fun to explore. And the sort of slightly intersecting idea is that we've had a couple of guys in the chat there, Writer's Quest for Glory, saying, I'd like to see stories focused on the late 80s figures that had no time in tunes. And Pendragon Design and Toys there saying that his opinion has been to keep ARAH firmly set in the 80s. The 80s have endless potential, and things like Stranger Things have revealed the staying power. So I guess G.I. Joe as a period piece, ?
I think my big concern, and Jason has talked about it a couple different times, is how do we bring new readers into this book? And I'm not sure if we just stick it in the 80s, if that's going to bring any new eyes onto the book.
Also, there, it's like The Simpsons, like 20 seasons in, they have cell phones and then smartphones, but they're still the same age. So it's definitely 2023 in G.I. Joe because of iPads and drones, but they still refer to flashback. There's still flashbacks to Vietnam. I think if G.I. Joe were to have a discrete ending, I think you could sort of lock it in a time. Like, I think if there was my actual argument for a new live action movie would be to set it in 1982, right? You solve a lot of problems. It's like the Transformers live action movie Reset with the Bumblebee movie. Set it in the 80s, right? It's like, we're not going to worry. And most people don't know that there's been a G.I. Joe comic running the last 12 years. And so to them, it is the 80s. And I think a lot of people sort of who follow comics sort of don't realize that G.I. Joe went past 1989 into the 90s and ended in 94. So I think that argument for keeping it in the 80s, I think some version of that does make sense. But yes, to Brian's point, that also bumps up against bringing in new readers and making it feel modern or contemporary. So I think the sort of compromise is what Hama has done, which is it's all these characters. They haven't really aged. It's now, but we're not going to worry about how many years it's been.
He quit saying Vietnam and he starts saying East Asia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think from a miniseries perspective, just having a Locked in the 80s would be great. Or when you talk about a Proto Joe, having that and you made the real flocked hair joke at the beginning of this, having that kind of story, both Proto Joe and modern contemporary, taking Joe into more of an adventure team would be an amazing miniseries, a fun read. You know, not necessarily straight Ben 10ing it, but certainly, you know, the roots would be adventure team, right? If Joe Colton is the original Joe, he was military, he became the adventure team. Hawk and Duke would be old enough to have been with him on adventures outside of Korea and Vietnam for both of them. You could really build something with that, and it would be fun. And then you take it into the Proto, where, I mean, hell, half the ninja staff would be a great adventure team.
So I like this idea. I can imagine Hama's not interested in doing
100%.
70s Hasbro toys, and the Revolution era IDW comics did that, where they made a link between original Joe, Adventure Team, into the Real American Hero characters, even if not the Hamaverse. And I think for every page you spend on other Joes besides Joe Colton, who are like pre-Joes, that's one less page for Snowstorm and Big Boa and the Astro Vipers and the Hydro Vipers. And so,
but we're also talking about mini-series, not Larry
yeah, that's
Hama.
true.
Because
Yeah,
Larry
okay, if
made
it's
the connection with Joe Colton and then left it.
yes,
And Jane, right? So we have
Right.
G.I. Nurse and we have unnamed G.I. Joe that lasted for 13 years. He's done that. He did that connection. He did it in what, issue 84, 85? And then he's done. He made the connection. We're good. But miniseries and grabbing some new writers, some young writers, men and women who are in the trenches today, writing really fun, adventure-y things, doing an uncomfortable for us take on G.I. Joe that is very adventure-y, could be that link to new readership. I also wonder if, you know, not being a part of Marvel or DC hurts in terms of eyeballs.
What do you mean?
Just having it as part of the big two would certainly put more eyes on it. I mean, IDW is certainly a big company, but I don't know. I love Larry. I love Larry's vision. I love his path. I love that Larry has a stinker issue, and then 2 issues later, it's the best he's ever written. And who gives a shit, because he's writing the next one, you know, and we're armchairing it. But having all these other things, and you're right, can it sustain all the sales? If it could, would IDW have done more? But I'm always going to be the guy buying, so I guess it's easy for me to say do more.
We've lingered a lot on the thought of what we would want Larry's book to be like, what a second book running alongside that might look like, or we might want to be. But if there was to be an entirely separate book, what do you think you would want that to be? What would be your ideal non-ARAH book? Brian, do you have any thoughts?
I don't know. I really like the beginning of some of the different stories that IDW was doing out of the ARAH continuity. I just think so many of them were cut short or felt rushed at the end, to like rushed, and now it's not as good, so now we're going to cut it short. But I think some of those had really good starting points. I mean, anything like that.
Brian,
stuff in particular?
World on Fire, are you also referring to when the Chuck Dixon series started, when Cobra started, when Origins started?
Yeah, that early Chuck Dixon stuff I think was very promising, and definitely felt like something that I wanted to read alongside of Larry's book. And then it kind of got a little convoluted when you started crossing over with the other properties and things. But all those, I mean, well, most of those I thought were really cool and fun ideas. So I'm open to reading anything that's put out there. I don't know. I don't have any particular ideas on original ideas I want, but I'm open to reading what other people create.
I might be, I think I might say one thing and do the other, because as an analogy, the IDW Transformers run that starts in 2006 and gets kind of relaunched in, I think it's 2012, excuse me, when the ongoing written by Mike Costa splits into Robots in Disguise and More Than Meets the Eye, written by Barber and Roberts. From then, for the next several years, that continuity is sublime. And when it ends with Unicron, I thought, this is a joke, but I thought, well, I never need to read a Transformer story ever again, because that 6-year cycle was the best Transformers story I've ever experienced. And there were no Transformers comics for a couple months. And I thought, good, IDW, take some time off. Let us all. And then 3 months later, they're like, we've got a new series and we've got a new writer. And I was being this grumpy fan, like, I haven't heard of this writer. I don't know if this writer deserves to write Transformers. Like, no, I'm not an editor. I'm not Hasbro. That's not my call. And, someone at IDW and someone at Hasbro had this writer in mind, and this writer had a pitch. And this is Brian Ruckley, and wrote a bunch of Transformers comics for the next 2 or 3 years. And at the beginning, I just couldn't bring myself to read them. It was too soon. It's like, no, these look good, but unless they're like amazing or somehow the same creatives, I still need some time to reset. And so here I am saying to everyone, you got to buy all the G.I. Joe comics or we're going to lose it. So if something, like when the Paul Allure book started, I thought I will buy this, and that looks interesting. I'm not sure how into it I am emotionally, and I've come back to it later. So I don't have a good answer for what I want sort of the other G.I. Joe to be, sort of how different or how experimental or how sort of, if you squint, it could still be in the Hama universe. But I'll go back to our previous discussion of miniseries by, I don't want to say like top creators, because that means that's like sales or popularity. I mean like singular visions, even if it's a team, who have a really interesting G.I. Joe story to tell that can be off to the side or kind of crazy. And Jason, your turn.
It's very self-centered because it's already the story I play.
It's a story about Jason Joe.
Yes.
He's the hero of an elite. Sorry.
Yeah, G.I. Alexander, G.I. Jason. No, but I love this idea of keeping it a little bit G.I. Joe seriousness, adding in that little Cobra, adding in that Saturday morning. So generally for me, Roblox and Rock and Roll are the buddy cop where Chuckles gets them into problems. And I would love to see that sort of miniseries where it's your two big guys and the shit starter Chuckles. And they so you can keep it funny, but you still have that seriousness of, these are your heavy weapons guys. They mow down rooms of people. And you have that special mission sort of feel with Chuckles. You have the silliness, and the seriousness all mixed together. It's very adventure-y, and I would love that as an adventure story in the G.I. Joe world. Does it have to fit into Larry's? Don't care. Could it fit into Paul's or anyone else's? Don't care. Just fun, a little humor, a little very real, and run and gun. And it's a good palate cleanser as well for me, because I can go back to whatever, and I've had a little bit of fun.
I think one of the things that we've talked about multiple times is miniseries. I really think that's a winning formula. Like, have a miniseries, but if it could be announced early on, like this is going to be 10 issues or this is going to be 8 issues. Like, let us know, okay, this is the beginning, this is an end. I'll get into that. Not like,
and let the writer know.
5 trades. That's a perfect.
I was thinking about the there was a Ninja Turtles anniversary special that IDW published, I want to say 3 years ago, and I think it was square bound. I think it was 48 or 64 pages, and it had one very short story from every continuity, from the original Mirage Volume 1 and Volume 2 continuity, from the Archie continuity, from the Image Comics Eric Larson Volume 4 continuity, which then got wrapped up later at IDW, which was sort of a miracle. And from the current IDW continuity, the Tom Waltz continuity. And, you know, a lot of writers can't necessarily pull off like a super exciting or satisfying story in 8 pages. And that's probably what you get in this kind of special. But I loved the fact that this said to all of the fans, we're still thinking of you, right? Because they get a letter every month or so. It looks in the normal letters page. It's like, can you do anything with the Archie continuity? It's like, no, we don't want to. That's the diplomatic answer is no plans at this time. And no plans, right? It's like you read old Marvel comics, like no plans at this time, but you never know, right? You know, Jason, I always forget Sigma 6 even exists. And I don't know that Paul Allore has like an 8 or 10 page story he wants to tell in the World on Fire universe.
Infestation, right? And that weird, like 3-eyed Cobra Commander.
Did he write the two issues of Infestation?
Well, I don't know if it's two. He wrote a short story that was very goofy, and like Cobra Commander had like half a snake face. World on Fire was not his first G.I. Joe.
Yeah,
and it is way outside of the bounds of G.I. Like it is coloring well outside the lines of G.I. Joe. I get the sense that Paul Allore is one of those artists who, if you ask him to write something, he'll find a way of writing to that brief of, you know, okay, you've got 8 pages, give me 8 pages, I'll make 8 pages work. You know, since we're missing the anniversary, I feel like this past year would have been the perfect time to do a double-sized special, you know, and you get one of the people who wrote the Sigma 6 cartoon or the Devil's Due person who wrote the Sigma 6 cartoon comic book. I love that.
And you get one of the Devil's Due guys to write an 8-page story. And this is a big swing because such a book would be, you know, $7, $8, $9, $10. And it's hard to do variant covers on a big thing like that. And I don't expect a new publisher to do this early on. But there's some goodwill there. And with Turtles, it's easier because the cast is smaller. You know, like after a couple of years, they just kept making the same 4 Turtles toys. But G.I. Joe is in this position now where it does have all these different continuities and sort of kinds of fans. And, you know, I don't think Sigma 6 as a comic needs to be a miniseries. I don't think that's something that we need to go back to. But I not knowing the sales of Saturday Morning Adventures, man, I can't imagine that some kind of return to that, a graphic novel, a miniseries. It's like most people think that's what G.I. Joe is, right? It's like you just walk up to someone and you like sing half the jingle, or you say, "And now I know," and they like finish the line for you.
Do you want to have my? I think you've been sort of walking into this already a little bit. So the thing that I think I would really like to see, and I really like what Brian said actually, that, you know, I don't necessarily know what I want. Make some really brilliant comics, and I'll read those, and hopefully they're great. You know, if you were to ask me at the beginning of the IDW era, what do you want IDW to publish? I wouldn't have said, I want you to give me a book called Cobra, and it's written by this guy that I've not already heard of, and drawn by this guy that I don't actually know about, and it's set in Cobra. It's not necessarily the idea always. It's you know, it's it's the execution as well. So I'm not going to say, give me this idea, this combination of characters, this event. I get some great creators, let them have at it, and hopefully we'll have a great comic at the end of it.
I would love to hear some of the pitches from Diana, since she has the ear of Larry.
So the idea that I had was like a Legends of the Dark Knight style book with rotating creators, maybe even a bit of an anthology. So you've got maybe 1 or 2 3 stories happening simultaneously, and get some top tier creators in to give them their chance to do a G.I. Joe story. So if they want to do a one and done, they want to do a short story, if they only got a chance to do a pin-up, let them have a play. We can look back. We can bring in some of the Devil's Due people. Let them play in the G.I. Joe sandpit again. Kirkman could dust off his G.I. Joe on the Moon story that maybe wouldn't fit anywhere else, but as a little fun thing, in an anthology, maybe it would. Brandon Joe was back doing Snake Eyes. Atomic Arcade video game, let him have another Snake Eyes comic in an anthology, and then sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't, but that's okay. There'll be something else from another creative team next issue, next story. That's my grand vision for something that I'd quite like to see.
Maybe this is part of what Diana was nudging us about, communicating with Hasbro. And Hasbro did a great job with comic books. Diana says, I don't pitch comics, but sometimes my ideas have snuck in. There was a span of, it feels like 8 years from, I don't know, toy people can correct me, but it feels like it was 2008 to 2014 where there were so many Star Wars figures and Transformers and G.I. Joes that came with a comic book, toys. And it wasn't always clear to me if the comic book, I guess Marvel Legends was doing this too, right? And it wasn't always clear to me from the comic book what issue it was, because sometimes it was, I think, the cover of that issue being reprinted, or maybe it was a different cover that had sort of that character that you were buying the toy of. But right now there is no movie and there is no TV show. It's like, we're not Transformers. We're not getting that stuff. And, the people at Hasbro are concentrating on making toys, and the people at New Publisher are concentrating on making comics. And, the people making the comics may not feel like they want to also take on the job of somehow advertising toys. But I do think the people at Hasbro, if not the toy team, then the brand team, and that might be one and the same, have such an opportunity, and dare I say an obligation, to get the word out about these comics. The classified line was this surprise hit, and it's continued and it's gotten bigger. And, printing and fitting a comic in with a toy is this whole additional packaging and like publication challenge. And we hear from Michael Kelly that in the case of the Nerf exclusive issue 300 G.I. Joe variant cover, Hasbro published that, not IDW.
Or would have done. We don't know the status of the product because it's been cancelled for the moment. All of the orders have been cancelled, so that comic may not happen. But that was the intent, that they would publish it themselves, so they could work with the logistics to actually package it with the Nerf gun.
Thank you for correcting me. I was not following that toy development. But this might be too simple. But if half the people buying classified figures open them, and half of them would read a cool thing that comes with that toy, maybe half of them would then buy another cool thing to read about G.I. Joe on their own at their local comic shop, or from an online vendor. And whether it is a new comic just for that toy, whether it's an old issue that's just a cool issue, whether it's sort of the best issue from the last 10 years that somehow fits that toy. You know, I want the brand, the partners, the fans to sort of reinvigorate and be reinvigorated that it is more than one thing.
And that sort of that crossover, that equation of toys plus comics together, it feels like something that's almost been entirely missing from the IDW era. And some of the most fun things from Larry's original run was him responding to the demands of, put in this toy, let's put in Serpentor, let's put in Tomex and Zaymot, and those stories would never have happened without that sort of external kind of input of respond to this. And I don't know the best way of doing it, but having some more connection between the classified toys and the comics, I think, is just something that's missing a bit at the moment.
This wouldn't sell any more HasLab Sky Strikers, I don't think. It's the pre-orders and that's it, right? You can't still order it. But if in issue 301 a Sky Striker takes off and there's like conspicuously Scarlet in that that pilot outfit and the other ground crew or whatever, like, you know,
and she starts complaining, I don't have a handle on my crossbow.
You know, if someone at Hasbro is saying to someone making this comic, you got to include this, fans would notice. People buying issue 301 would notice. And to Mark's point about Hama having this external stimuli, it's not a perfect analogy, but I think about the George Lucas making a Star Wars trilogy with too many limitations, and the George Lucas a generation later making a Star Wars trilogy with no limitations, and the difference in those movies. And if you say to a Larry Hama, like, here's this weird toy, you have to use this. Right. Also, Diana points out something that we keep forgetting because it's like so obvious. Where's the Don Marino action figure? I guess we need to. Are people? Mark, Brian, Jason, are people in the Hasbro streams? Are they saying like, "Where's the Dawn figure? Where's the Dawn figure?"
No, well, I bring it up every so and again.
We got an announcement that Helix is come to the classified line eventually, so I don't see why Dawn can't be shortly thereafter.
I mean, Helix is what, 20 years old now, so how much more do we have to wait for Dawn, I guess?
But I would love to see. We're being nudged in the right direction with Helix. Sorry, Jason.
Yeah. No, but I mean, and Helix has a 4-inch modern architecture figure already. I would love to see Helix in like the retro O-ring and Dawn in a classified, a modern, and a retro. Like, to me, G.I. Joe is 3 scales, and let's run all 3. But then again, who's buying them other than, those of us that are also doing this?
Transformers or Batman will do those packs where it's like sort of the legacy. It's like early Optimus Prime, modern Optimus Prime, or like 3 different Batmans. Have a 3-pack that's Snake Eyes and Throwdown and Dawn as these 3 different versions of Snake Eyes, and then include, I don't know what issue, but use Nitho Diaz's variant cover for, is it 297 with the 3 of them as a like replacement cover for that. Yes, let's get some toys. It needs to go both ways. I'd like Hasbro to nudge a comics publisher and Hama to include certain toys and characters, and I would like.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Super 7 can go so niche in the way that they do, they're making. I don't know if this even exists or not, but they're making the Boy George version of Snake Eyes, and what other random sort of character very specific to the cartoon, to the comic that is really super niche. And if they've got a commercial model that allows them to do that, you think surely Hasbro, with their much wider reach, surely they could give it to us if they
Is the difference there? Is the difference there between Super 7 and Hasbro? One of them has Wall Street behind them demanding certain things, and the other is an independent thing that can do what the hell they want.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. I would love to see a Super 7 breadth at Hasbro, but I don't think their market share would appreciate it.
I think what Mark is inadvertently suggesting is that we'll get a Super 7 Dawn in an animated style before we get a classified.
We might.
Dawn.
Yes.
And not even because Super 7 would get to it in 10 years, but because in a year they'll think, let's throw in a curveball. Let's make a character cartoonish that hasn't been, but that people keep asking for.
Super 7 did Quinn, who wasn't in the cartoons. I'm still waiting for them to do Dr. Venom. Because that would be nice.
Yeah. That's probably on their 5-year plan.
And once they do Dr. Venom, they can do Hotwire with just a new head, right? If I Google
they
after
can
you mentioned
reuse the Blanca head. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. After you mentioned Hotwire, I quickly Googled him and I saw that there have been 2 versions of the figure, and one is a white lab coat.
Yeah.
Mark, have we exhausted this bullet point? Is there another one you want to get to? Diana says, Diana says, wait, one more bit. Why not do a Has team and a new publisher Q&A with podcasters and YouTubers the way they did for the toys?
Love it.
Hopefully they can, make a big splash of that announcement. Yeah, a big push from Hasbro on the new comic, just as much as they would for any other new toy release.
Yeah, it's probably worth reminding ourselves that the thing that we keep comparing this to, right? G.I. Joe in the 80s, when the comic was pushing the toy and the show was pushing the toy and the comic, and the toy was driving everything. And these companies were working in concert with each other. And this brand was the number 1 or number 2 brand, right, in terms of sales. What we have now is a different relationship where a publisher licenses G.I. Joe not because it's the hot new thing, but because it is an established thing with a guaranteed audience and market share, maybe a very small one. The way that there's a comics publisher that's got the license for the Phantom, and there's a comics publisher that has the license for Zorro. And I don't want G.I. Joe to be this sort of nostalgia thing, this nostalgia brand, but sort of G.I. Joe is not like the big deal in the discussion right now in toy sales and TV ratings. So, to hope for a comics publisher to say to Hasbro, how are we going to launch this, and talk to everyone about it in sort of bigger ways, as opposed to some established comics channel ways that a publisher would announce a new G.I. Joe comic and promote it, might be asking more than is reasonable.
And your comment there sort of triggered a thought as well, that the G.I. Joe comic isn't necessarily per se an exact license to just print money. The wherever it lands, it will do so because the people behind it are going to have an enthusiasm and a passion and probably a nostalgia, a similar sort of age to us, having grown up with the property, and more than anything else, going, G.I. Joe is cool, Transformers are cool. I would really love to have a hand in publishing them and creating them, because it's a a property that I'm passionate about, essentially. And as much as anything else, I think that must be a good thing, that you want to have the people behind it for it to be a passion project, because more than anything else, that's probably going to lead to some great product, or great comics. Product sounds a bit corporate, doesn't it?
Printed products, printed story-driven products.
Let's have a little bit of a sort of whiz around the square here. If we were going to get a new book, and it was going to be separate to, well, actually, it doesn't even matter if it's separate to Hama or not. The thought that I had about the Chuck Dixon verse as it started on his G.I. Joe #1, I think one of the things where it fell down a bit was that it was probably slightly too close to being ARAH for it to fully be its own thing. It certainly was its own thing and had its own continuity. But at times, Squints, it's the pits in a, in a desert under, etc. There's a lot of very similar sort of DNA there. That side. If you were to have a blank check and have a creative team who you think you'd really be interested to see their take on the G.I. Joe book, who would you bank up for? My one, and I've said this many times, would be not that bat. It would be the creative team behind one of my favorite books. If you haven't read it, I do recommend it. But one of my favorite books of the last couple of decades, Lazarus by Greg Rucka, Michael Lark, and I think in terms of the look and the feel of an interesting G.I. Joe take, I could see them doing some very interesting things.
And Lark has done 1 or 2 covers for IDW.
Indeed, yes. Who wants to go with their hot take on if there's a particular creative team that they'd be interested in seeing on the brand?
I mean, if we're just doing like dream teams, I would love to see like Brubaker and Phillips do a story, maybe like just a few Joes on some kind of little mission. I think they could do some phenomenal stuff.
Jason?
Oh,
Yes. Brubaker and Phillips behind the likes of Criminal
And Fatal and Kill or Be Killed and Reckless.
And yeah. They've done a lot.
and they fit the style rather well with all of those titles as well. Oh shit, I'm spacing on names all of a sudden. I think a fun take would be Bun and Hurt, the guys who did Six Gun. It would certainly lean heavily into the sci-fi side of it, since Bun is such a horror fanatic, and Hurt's art style is very whimsical. And then,
but Hurt can also do grounded. Like
Hurt can do fantasy. He can do grounded. Yeah, Hurt is incredible.
What was the Steve Gerber? What was the Steve Gerber book he did? Hard Time, right? About the kid in prison.
Yeah. And then I'm gonna have to look his name up because I'm forgetting it all of a sudden.
You say the book that he
Shanghai Red. He wrote the one about Mount Everest.
Let's give the mic over to Tim, and maybe you can do a quick Google.
Chris Sebela. I'm probably mispronouncing.
Christopher Sebela.
Yes, Christopher Sebela. Him is the writer. Sorry. I love the way he writes and his sort of grounded approach. I think, and he's also has a wild brain. So I think it'd be a lot of fun as well. And I think Diana just threw up a recommendation while I was stumbling over a human's name.
Okay.
Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Wow.
Absolutely.
Talk about going straight for the top. Yeah.
Sure.
Or Brian K. Vaughan and Cliff Chang. Why not?
On Paper Girls. I like all of these fan votes. I feel a little self-conscious, not to duck out of the question. I feel a little self-conscious saying specific names because I feel like if I know someone who knows them, that's like slightly putting them on the spot. So what I will say is I like all of your answers, and I have imagined G.I. Joe pages connected to your answers, and it's kind of a joke, but I have this line that I say to my manager at my shop every week or two when I have read a recent comic that I think is really handsome. If someone draws really well, and it can be kind of messy and like evocative, sort of more in the Bill Sienkiewicz mode, it can be more grounded, like old school G.I. Joe. It can be sort of stylized and hot and slick, like some of the X-Men books. And this also applies to color artists on new Marvel books, new Boom books, new Image books. A thing that I sometimes will say, I'll point to a comic and I'll say to my manager, I just read this, and I'll say, oh, is it good? And I'll say, this guy should draw G.I. Joe. Or I'll say, this guy should color G.I. Joe. And my manager will chuckle because most of the time it's someone who you think is sort of miscast for G.I. Joe, or they're doing a creator-owned book at Image, or they're doing sort of a high-profile like X-Men related miniseries, and they like probably don't want to take a pay cut and work on a licensed book, which can be a pain. So he chuckles. But I say this a lot. So I have a long list of people who are sort of pre-approved because they are not just solid, but exciting. And exciting can mean a lot of different things. And some of them are more in a classic Marvel 80s mold, and some of them are not at all. But I will name one artist who I don't feel embarrassed to sort of say, why doesn't this guy draw G.I. Joe? Because he has, and that is Dave Johnson. Dave Johnson does not do interiors anymore. The last time he did, I think, was like 2003 when he drew half of Superman Red Sun and then didn't draw the other half. And someone else very good drew the other half. So that's a nice book you should buy. Dave Johnson is a cover artist, but he's had a couple connections to G.I. Joe, which I find noteworthy. Mark, even this week on the Talking Joe Facebook page, has posted some convention sketches and commissions that Dave Johnson has drawn in the last like 5 years. Dave Johnson has done a few covers for IDW, and Pendragon Designs and Toys says Dave Johnson's Super Patriot miniseries from the 90s. Those issues were amazing. I have been told that those first covers that Dave Johnson did, the earliest IDW covers that Dave Johnson did, there's one of Destro, there's one of Duke and Scarlet, right? Into someone like Upside Down, I can't remember. Someone told me that Johnson had done those earlier for Hasbro. They were not for covers for IDW, and that then they got used. I don't know if that's true, but Dave Johnson did a variant cover, connecting variant cover for the final issues of the IDW run, and Dave Johnson applied for the job of lead character designer on G.I. Joe Renegades. And some people out there own some of those pencil drawings. And I don't know what his like favorite stuff is. Seems like he likes Batman, keeps going back to Batman, right? It's gone back to like Punisher and Nick Fury. I think he's a professional who will like do a good drawing if an editor gives him a good job to do. But something tells me that this guy is either some kind of G.I. Joe fan or is interested in the designs of G.I. Joe because they're such great designs. And a couple times recently, I've thought, okay, new publisher is probably going to get all new artists who are not connected to G.I. Joe. But they should get Dave Johnson as cover artist.
Yeah, there was a question. I suggested Greg Rucka as a writer potentially, and he's probably too interested in doing his own creator-owned stuff to kind of step into this world these days. But you never know if he's got an affection for the property and is rewarded for it. Greg Rucka would do interesting G.I. Joe books. Maybe he already did. He's not done any G.I. Joe, but pop fact, he was suggested in that Wizard article back before The Devil's Due with that amazing J. Scott Campbell pin-up that was commissioned for the article, where they said, let's get some 80s books back. And then this was the precursor to sort of Devil's Due actually starting their run. And they suggested the writer of G.I. Joe as being Greg Rucka in that article. So that probably would have been the time to try and snap him up back a little bit earlier in his career.
There are also, Greg Rucka wrote Whiteout and Whiteout Melt, which was later republished as like Total Whiteout together. And if you squint, that's a G.I. Joe Special Missions story.
It's a great story.
And Steve Lieber, who drew that, had drawn an issue of G.I. Joe, some of his earliest comics work, right? He drew half of like one of the issues with Megatron and one of the aerial bots, right? So there are these connections. There are, in terms of artists, I think it's easier to sort of like fan cast or fantasize. Writers, I think it's harder because Hama has such a point of view. And Hama has done many things, right? He has drawn comics, he has lettered comics, he has edited comics. And I don't think a different writer for G.I. Joe, whether it's the Hamaverse or not, needs to have also done these things. But so much of Hama's G.I. Joe verse is informed by his breadth of reading and consuming of entertainment and travel and like meeting people. So G.I. Joe is this very particular thing, and I think we sometimes take for granted. I know I do when I read a new IDW issue, and it's like, well, that was good or that was okay, it's like, oh, this guy's lived a very interesting life. Excuse me, present tense. This guy lives a very interesting life, and but if like all it takes is some other person with a great idea, and they might be like 20 and, sort of not have lived much of a life, but they've got some great ideas and they're really hungry. I will say, just in terms of one sort of fan thing, I don't know that there's any reason why Brian Bolland would ever draw a G.I. Joe cover, but I've always wondered, and I can sort of imagine it. I can, it's like I sort of imagine Duke with a white background, and because there's such a like technical perfection to his faces and clothing, I don't know that he's interested. I don't know that he gives G.I. Joe any thought. I don't know that any publisher could match his page rate. I think as he's gotten older, he's doing sort of fewer covers, or they're sort of only when he wants to, or more special, or whatever. He's doing a lot of like DC work, right? But I sometimes think, what a cover by that guy would look like. And if you squint, like his covers for that Vertigo miniseries, Adventures of the Rifle Brigade, right? It's like he's done, and he did a Sergeant Rock cover years ago for a Sergeant Rock special. It's like if you turn your head sideways and squint, you can sort of imagine it.
Yeah, I think he's potentially one of those artists that if you catch him at the right moment, ask him the right way, and he's just open to the idea, then you might be lucky. But yeah, he sort of does definitely pick and choose.
Mark, are you telling me that I made a mistake when I went to that convention and he was there and he wasn't drawing and there was no line, and I didn't try and get a convention sketch from him? I just assumed it would take hours or that it was cost prohibitive, and I didn't even bring it up, because why would this guy draw G.I. Joe?
If you'd have got him at the right time,
right.
I think he probably wouldn't have appreciated being on the spot to draw something he didn't know in a convention environment. You might have been lucky with a Batman or a Joker or something if under those circumstances, but you never know. So just as a complete sort of contrast to some of the stuff we've been talking about what we would want to see, Diana put out the idea of a book that Hasbro or the new publisher might want to explore, which is, in my honest opinion, if they wanted to comic to catch middle schoolers, they should do a comic based on the young adult books. So there's one out, one announced, which is kind of its own, own thing, even though it's taking the classified name in the title. Middle school readers tend these days to read books with teens that they can relate to in trade paperback format, and maybe even sort of a manga kind of format as well. And that might not be the book that we would want to read, but it might be the one that would catch on with that particular audience. And as a G.I. Joe fan, I might not like that, but not everything has to be for me. Sometimes, sometimes things can be for other people.
Diana, that's a great idea. And there are there are many publishers that have been comics publishers that have been pushing into the young adult graphic novel space. And I keep sort of forgetting this, but Phil Noto has drawn the covers for these G.I. Joe classified young adult novels.
First one.
Just the first one,
was
not
Phil
the
Noto, and I think Stephanie Hans in a very similar style for the second one.
Thank you. Okay. And Noto has a connection to G.I. Joe, having done a couple covers for Devil's Due and that Scarlet issue.
Yeah. There's some other suggestions being thrown out there, so let's touch on them. These are great, all great suggestions. George Jimenez would be a awesome G.I. Joe artist.
I think that's Jorge Jimenez.
Jorge, okay. And
that's who's currently drawing Batman and doing a miniseries for Mark Millar.
And here we go, Pendragon Design and Toys, the man of many AKAs, I think. I always want my Joe covers to be illustrated and painted by Travis Charest. I think is how. Thank you, Tim. I tried.
He's been doing some graphic novels for humanoids in the Hodorowski universe, but did come back and has done a couple like Marvel and DC covers recently.
He's getting a bit more active on Twitter and whatnot. And Brian Hitch would do a killer cover. That would be interesting. They should reach out to him because, again, yeah, you're going to say it.
Brian Hitch drew some Action Force.
Indeed.
Can you help
first?
Can you help us out? What issues of Action Force or European Missions?
So this is the Action Force weekly 50-issue series by Marvel UK, and it was basically the comic that he got his big break on. He was 18-ish, probably younger, still drawing on his mum's dining room table, I think, and yeah, sort of inking over Mike Collins and also doing some of his own work. He worked on a prelude and postscript to the Silent Interlude story, and he did a few covers as well, and in quite a different style, as very, very early in his career, quite a different style to what you'd recognize from him now. So it would be interesting to see him do it, just in terms of him being an incredible artist, but also that arc of him starting out his career with G.I. Joe, seeing something from him all of these years later would be fascinating.
I think it might be possible because when Titan was reprinting Marvel's Transformers in the early 2000s, 6 issues at a time, the soft covers had new Andrew Waldman artwork, and the hardcovers, each one had a different cover artist. And Hitch did one of the Transformers covers. It's got Galvatron and I guess it's Buster Witwicky. And that was sort of a bookend because he had done some Transformers early on, right, at Marvel UK in like 87 or so. And so here he was in 2002 or so, coming back to do a single image, and it's great.
Perfect. So we said at the header of this one, or maybe that was before we started, that we're probably going to keep it quick and light and breezy, and it's been light and breezy perhaps, but we've still gone on a little while. So I guess, was there any concluding thoughts before we just want to wrap up? Brian, do you want to take the mic for a minute, because we've been hogging it?
No, I'm just eager to see who the new publisher is and kind of get a timetable of what we're looking at. I was kind of suspecting that maybe it was going to be New Comic Book Day, but I think that's even kind of past at this point.
You mean free Comic Book Day?
Yes, sorry, Free Comic Book Day.
Yeah, so that's May, but stores ordered their Free Comic Book Day comics a month ago, which means they were in catalogs like 2 months ago. So that one we have past that when we would have known if it had been then. Brian, I have a question for you. Issue 301, do you think it's going to be 301 or a new number 1? And do you think it's going to pick up right after the cliffhanger from 300?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know. I suspect it's going to be issue 301. Now, whether it picks up right after, I think we talked about earlier, who knows with Larry, it could skip forward. But there's so many cliffhangers in 300. Like it's more than, it's 5, I think 4 or 5.
That's a good
But
point.
you have to wrap up something there. Like you can't just ignore all of those and move forward.
Yeah, the first page of 301 is the funeral of Serpentor Khan. The Joes are saying, "Ooh."
So I don't know.
Even though
see what it is, but I have no idea.
It's 301, and we're down in the sewers. Lightfoot is defusing a bomb, and there's no reference to anything that occurred outside of that. You never know. I think we'll be hot on the heels personally. There's too much there in 300 to sort of to breezily go past it. Jason?
I think if he's going to pick up anything, it'll be the C-130. Because it's easy to just say, they got away. What was with them? I don't know. A device. And we can come back to that. Because, I mean, we talked about this together. Snake Eyes felt like, to me, the point of the last handful of issues. So it'd be more... I don't know. I just see them resolving the C-130 and celebrating Snake Eyes, and then jumping back into the story at a random point to then swing back around to zombie bombs.
Yeah, the cliffhangers. I was just thinking about what fight, and I was trying to do the mental math. We've got the C-130 about to crash. We've got a mutant zombie bomb that is about to be detonated. You've got the Joes. Sort of jumping off the whale, about to kind of properly, fully invade the compound and get Serpentor Khan. You've got Cobra Commander captive by the Joes. You've got Snake Eyes and Scarlet sort of reunited. Would you call it reunited? I don't know. It is what it is. Which is a kind of conclusion, but you want that to be followed up. And then there's probably more besides that I'm not even remembering off the top of my head. There's a lot to digest and follow up there.
What I would love to see is just hard cut to the pit with Laura, in front of the board, like breaking down how Cobra works today. They've got the brainwave scanner with all 3 in it, and they're like, all right, we stole this from them. Laura's telling us how things work. We're going to decommission that. And then we can just jump into whatever story we want. But I just, it feels like the C-130 is the important part.
Okay, Jason, my wrap-up question for you. 301, double-sized issue or triple-sized issue? What do you think?
I would love a full trade paperback-sized issue of 301. Just get it all in, right? Like,
this is like when Marvel's done these. This is like Marvel's done these 100-page issues, and then a month later they just publish it as a graphic novel with like 15 additional pages.
Correct. I would love that, but I'm the wrong audience because I'm gonna buy it. I'm excited for it, but from a new publisher standpoint, probably an issue and a half, oversized. It's the safer bet. Double sized isn't just double money, right? So 1.5 is probably the safer bet when you're doing the launch.
What you just made me think of was that obviously the rumor is that this is going to be Skybound under Robert Kirkman. When he launched an amazing book called Firepower, he went in with an issue 0, which wasn't just an issue 0. It was a trade paperback. And the subtitle is Prelude. Firepower. You go to a comic book store. Firepower Volume 1 is Prelude, and it's great. And this new publisher has been negotiating a little while, but the Devil's Due announcement was early 2022. So you'd think this new publisher has had a very good idea that they're in the running since.
You said
2020.
Devil's Due. Do you mean IDW?
Sorry, IDW. So IDW announced that they lost it sort of quite early in 2022. So this new publisher must have known they're in the running, 2021, just got it in the bag, 2020, early 2022. So they've had the best part of a year to be getting on with something. If they wanted to do something, get a lot of pages in the bag, release something big. And we've been talking about, that they've had a bit of space to create a bit of a buffer, so that they can, keep on releasing without. They could do something like this.
I would love that. I think it's possible from a legal perspective that that in the calendar year that the old publisher still has the license, the new publisher doesn't actually start like paying for artists and writers. I think that's very possible. As much as I want the new publisher to have banked 5 issues already, or consider a quintuple sized premiere issue, or the first month that just runs weekly. I also think I think we underestimate for any new publisher, whether they have done licensed books or not, just how much of a slow ramping up it is for them to start this specific back and forth relationship with Hasbro and with Hama. And if Hama has a research consultant, editor, assistant editor, and then lining up artists, that artist is going to have to do like some sort of tryout art, and Hasbro is going to have to approve it after the new publisher approves it. But yes, 5 issues in the first 5 weeks. I'm ready for it.
Does Alexander have strong opinions about what he'd like to see in the new book?
What do you want to see in issue 301 from a new publisher? Mike is right here.
This is the best question we've asked.
I haven't read 300 yet, though.
Well, get out.
Dang it.
I would love to see. I know Skybound is the main rumor, but after in July, having like 2 days to just sit and BS with Michael Golden, because both of our tables were extraordinarily slow, which I think is really a crime if Michael Golden's table is slow. In him talking about different comic book creators that loved G.I. Joe to the point that who has owned his issue of Yearbook, all the original pages, and how it's gone from creator hand to creator hand to creator hand. And Kirkman was part of that conversation, and just his enthusiasm about G.I. Joe, according to Michael Golden, I would love to see it, just because that's what made Devil's Due, regardless of its warts, it made it amazing, right? It was enthusiasm. That's what makes Larry's run. He's writing his friends. He's doing all these things. He's owned it for all this time. Paula Lore, his stuff had enthusiasm. I want that. So I'm excited if it would be Kirkman. If it's not Kirkman, I hope it's someone who has that same level of one of us, but without the hangups of, it has to be X because I've loved G.I. Joe since 1982.
Yeah, enthusiasm without hang-ups. That's a good ethos, I think. So I think we are pretty much at the end of this one, and we've had a lot of great comments sort of coming in all the way through. It's been sort of great to see. So I've tried to pop those in as we've been going along where they're most relevant. We've not been able to sort of share everything, but a big shout out to all of you who have been watching as you go along. Shout out to Articulated Chad, finally catching a G.I. Joe live. It's rare for us to be live when we're not talking about sketches, isn't it? So it's an unusual one for us to be doing this type of show. Big up to everybody who has been sending all of these comments through. I don't want to single out anyone too much, because then I'll have forgotten someone. But big thanks to all of you for watching live and getting involved. So as we wrap up, let's everyone have a plug Bryan. Where can people find you when you're not talking to us?
On YouTube, at A Real American Bryan. Also on Instagram, Real American Bryan.
I will put in the link in the show notes as well. I've not done that yet, but will do. And Jason, where can people find you? And have you got anything to tantalize us with things that might be coming up in your space?
So we're at Order of Battle podcast. It's on Audio Boom. It's on all the podcast feeds. We have not made the jump to YouTube yet. We're one of the few G.I. Joe podcasts that are still podcast only, evidently.
Which you still can.
Alexander and I and Joel, we talk about a lot of toys, but it tends to focus on G.I. Joe. And I don't know what we have coming up. Last year was a crazy year for us. And this year, I mean, we just did Winterfest. We're going to be at Toylanta. We got Joe Fest coming up. If we can make Heroes Con work. And hopefully we can convince Tim to come to a few of those. And, this is 2023. Next year is the 60th anniversary. So if you don't get over to the States this year, Mark, next year would be the year to come.
Crikey, I didn't realize I've been collecting G.I. Joe that long.
Also, I have a answer to your question earlier. Tin Sky Strikers on a flag.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what you want to see in issue 301.
And the only reason I thought of that is because we just did it.
Yeah, it's what you got in your living room right now. Too many Sky Strikers on a flag. Excellent stuff. Tim, where can people find you? I've got a banner for that one.
Video essays about TV and film at our YouTube page, Atomic Abe Productions. My comic book store, brick and mortar in Somerville, Massachusetts, is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com.
And if you are new to Talking Joe, you've got a website, talkingjoe.co.uk. That has got some information all about the show and links to all of the various places that you can find us. Oof. So I think that is us pretty much done. So you can just all join us together in singing along, if you so wish, in saying that
nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
There we go. Still, Tim, it was just you singing. But
we'll have Jim Shooter on a second time and we'll get him to do it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Alexander. Catch you next time.
Thank you, Mark.
Bye.